happy Monday. Today is the Monday, January 25th meeting of the Transportation Planning and Environment Committee. And we have, as always, a really full agenda. And so before we get started, we're going to go ahead and have introductions. Let's start with council members, I think, that are all online. I'm Julie Eisel, committee chair. Who else do we have online?
Larkin Eggleston, committee vice chair.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Good morning, everyone. Matt Newton, committee member.
Braxton?
Happy Monday, Braxton Winston, committee member.
Great, thank you. Mr. Driggs, I hope you're feeling better. You had a rough bout last week. Glad to see you back on camera.
Not completely recovered, but I can still take Braxton at any time. So pretty good.
Ooh, we needed you. Who else do we have on camera? Any other council members? Okay, let's go ahead and finish introductions on camera, and then we'll do the room. Who else do we have there? I see Liz.
Hi, this is Liz Babson with the Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Alicia Osborne, Planning, Design, and Development.
Andy Mock, Senior Project Manager for the Silver Line.
Great. Anybody else online? Looks like we're good. Why don't we go with Mr. Lewis?
Good morning. John Lewis, Executive Director of the Charlotte Area Transit System.
Taiwo Java, Planning Director and City Manager's Office. Good morning.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Lynn Alexander, Department of Transportation.
Okay, great. And with that, we're going to get right into a presentation from John Lewis on the CATS track. So go ahead, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the TAP Committee, again, John Lewis with Charlotte Area Transit System. If we're ready with the presentation, thank you. What we have entitled CATS Tracks is the culmination of 3 years of work within CATS to really begin to hone down on a system of performance measurement that drives outcomes rather than measuring outputs. This has been an effort that we've been working on for a number of years to quantify what makes a difference from an operational standpoint, what items are important to our customers, and how do we measure those items from a performance metric standpoint. And those are based on 4 management principles in CATS tracks, and that is outstanding customer service, strong financial stewardship, focus on employee engagement, and the impact to our community. Not only are we measuring those issues, but we're also an important part of keeping connected to our customers is also utilizing the Net Promoter Score function. The Net Promoter Score is a well-known business metric developed by the Harvard Business School that allows you to compare services across industries. And so when industries come up with their Net Promoter, and that is the number of people who are highly satisfied with your service versus subtracted by the number of people who are highly dissatisfied with your service, and you come up with that Net Promoter Score. And that Net Promoter Score can be compared across industries. And so what is the overall Net Promoter Score of a transit service versus, a cable provider or a information technology company? And when you look at the Net Promoter Score across the transit industry, that number is about 31%. We'll just set that aside for a moment. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll dig in a little deeper into CATS performance over the last couple of years. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this for over 3 years, and each year we actually survey our customers twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. And we asked them multiple questions about what is important to them as a transit rider, what are their top priorities, and then what is it that we are not measuring up to as an agency. And you'll see over the last 3 years from the first wave, which was done in 2017, we were doing well compared to industry standard. But what we've seen is when we ask our customers what's important to them, we adjust our behavior based on the information they provide, and we report back to the customers on those issues. They're rewarding us with very high customer satisfaction outcomes. And those surveys are done, as I mentioned, twice a year. Well over 800 people are surveyed in each wave. The last survey we did was just before the outbreak of COVID in March. We did not do one this fall, but we're looking forward to get back out to our customers as soon as possible. But we have, 3 years of data over 6 surveys, and I think it shows us some of the things that we need to focus on. This CATS Tracks has become our North Star for CATS. By asking our customers what's important, checking back with them on how we are maintaining and determining what are the priorities of our customers, and then focusing all of our efforts very keenly on our customers' top 5 items, shows that, once again, that we're on the right track since our customer satisfaction has continued to grow year over year. And we utilize this particularly when we are developing operating our budgets from a year-to-year basis to ensure that we are doing what is needed to provide excellent service. To use a service industry analysis, you can build a beautiful restaurant, have great ambiance but if the food is bad, you're going to have a very different outcome from your customers. And so this is what we've heard is the focus from our customers on the basics of providing great transportation service is what our customers are looking for. Next slide. And so when I talk about how do we quantify those performance metrics, again, in 4 areas: customer satisfaction, financial stability. The financial metrics are mandated by our Metropolitan Transportation Commission. These are the financial standards that our board has set for operations of CATS. And then employee success, and community impact. And we assign a goal each year as we're preparing our budget compared to the prior years. And then the outcome which we measure quarterly, we assign a numerical value as to how we are doing as the year goes on compared to the goals that we established for the year. And when you add up all of the metrics in those 4 areas, overall is point value is 100. Our goal each year is to be 90 at the minimum. We just missed it this year, but if you look at the ridership measures and the measurements associated with our financial stability, the impact of the pandemic has certainly had an impact on our ability to meet those measurements, but we own that. We're transparent about it. On those areas that we've fallen short, those are the areas that we will continue to focus on as we transition out of the pandemic. And we will have no less than same expectations for next year. Next slide. When I go back to our customer surveys, over the last 6 customer surveys, we've asked our customers for their top 10 issues. What are their priorities as riders of our system? And we do that on our fixed route, on our light rail, and our paratransit service, and we combine that to an overall agency-wide priority listing. And from our last survey in March of 2020, it was clear what our customers, their top issues are on-time performance, ensuring we have a fair price for our service. CATS has had one of the higher fares for riding our service. But hearing from our customers, we haven't raised fares in over 7 years, and keenly being aware of that importance of that factor to our customers. Hours of operation, travel time, and so the top issues from our customers are service-related areas. I will highlight, you can see in the box in the upper right-hand corner, that bus cleanliness dropped from the second most important to seventh in this. If we go to the next slide, when we did the same survey in the fall of 2019, October 2019, we were having some issues with our clean buses and trains. That was, other than buses arriving on time, cleanliness was the second most highest priority for our customers. Almost 700 people had notified us that that was important to them. If we can go back one slide, these slides probably, I should have switched these, but because we heard that cleanliness was an issue, we focused our efforts around that. We put more resources to that. The next time we went back and queried our customers, it went from the second highest issue to the seventh. And so that tells us we're on the right track with that. And we were receiving that kind of feedback from our customers. And so if I leave you with no other concept on this, it is that we are that getting back to basics of providing outstanding mobility services and keeping a keen focus on what our customers are saying is most important to them, and that is service reliability, and that is what has driven our Envision My Ride program and will continue to drive the investments we'll be making from a budgetary standpoint, making sure our buses and trains are on time, clean, safe, and have a wide variety of service options. That's what our customers are telling us. And so that, Madam Chair, concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd love to attend.
Any questions from the committee? Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, great performance report, and a credit to CATS. I had a couple of questions. Do you break down the numbers that you told us between rail and bus?
The numbers, what particular numbers are you referring to, sir?
When you talked before about the positive, yeah, I think the numbers you were showing us, like 55%, were the net positive ratings.
Yes.
So are those numbers broken down between rail and bus? Are they consistent between the two modes?
Absolutely, thank you. We could go back to the second slide. And so this is the overall agency net promoter score. We have that broken down by mode. I did not include each mode in the presentation. I wanted to keep it as succinct as possible, but I'll make sure that I'll send that information to you. Actually, rail is higher, a little bit higher than what you're seeing from an overall system, but this is the average of all the modes here. But we will send out all of the information by mode, rail, bus, and paratransit to each of the members.
And overall ridership and utilization, I mean, we've been through this very alien time with COVID, but what can you infer about the likely recovery and the kind of level of ridership in the system, fare box collections, things like that, when conditions become more normal?
Well, so far, I mean, COVID impacted us no differently than it had across all different industries. We lost, in the beginning, almost 80% of our ridership dropped overnight. Now, we have seen our ridership beginning to recover. We're upwards of 50% of our riders from a bus standpoint. The recovery of our ridership is tied completely to the recovery of the rest of the economy. What we have to see and what trends that we're seeing is a different type of travel even today. And so if we go back to January or February of 2020, what we saw from a ridership standpoint was we had these huge peaks in the morning, during the morning commute, and the evening commute. And our ridership dropped off midday and into the evenings. But what we're seeing now, just anecdotally, is rather, we still have those peaks in the morning, but the peaks aren't as high, and we're getting higher ridership during the off periods. And so as people's work habits and schedules change, people are utilizing our service differently than what they had before. And so our midday ridership is higher now, percentage-wise, when you are looking at a control for the overall drop in ridership. But our midday ridership and our evening ridership is higher from a percentage standpoint than it was before. And so what we'll have to continue to watch is how businesses come back, employees come back to businesses. Will there be stretch shifts? Will people be working, part days remotely, part days in the office? And our service will be tied to that kind of recovery.
Because the issue in my mind is that COVID has made it very hard for us to draw conclusions from the blue line about the investment that we're contemplating in the Silver Line and in other rail. So I don't think there's an easy answer to this, but if you would just keep in mind, it would be useful to know what we can glean from, after adjustment or taking into account the unusual circumstances about the underlying demand for light rail and utilization patterns for light rail, because we have to make this huge decision about a multi-billion-dollar investment in other light rail lines. And if there's anything that, in the way of data that's available locally to help guide us with that, it would be very beneficial. My last question briefly is, since I'm the budget chair guy, you mentioned fares. In the past, we've had the fares and then we've had the yield management. So are you expecting anything in the budget cycle that's about to begin that relates to revenue and fare revenues?
Sure. Great question, Councilman. I think the budget that we're preparing for FY22 will not include a fare increase. As we continue to look at how we recover from a ridership standpoint from the pandemic, I think CATS we are fortunate to be in a very good position financially. We have not had to dip into reserves to balance budget. We have been focusing our CARES funds on revenue replacement. We're offsetting the loss in ridership revenue, utilizing our CARES funds, and focusing on the capital investment in our program to ensure cleanliness. We're social distancing and utilizing technology to enhance customer confidence that our service is safe to ride. We're experimenting next with ultraviolet lights within all our vehicles. We're very sure that the surfaces of our vehicles are clean as a result and have very resistance to the virus. From a surface standpoint, next we're looking at technology, how we can clean the air within our vehicles, and those UV lights will be the next investment we're making. And so we're good from a financial standpoint over the next, as I mentioned, not having to dip in reserves. We're not projecting to do that, and we're focusing our CARES funds to help us get through the next several years in that regard.
And finally, the last point, since the suggestion has been made that ridership should be free, am I right to assume that would be about a $25 to $30 million event for your operating budget if there were no fares being charged at all?
Yeah, looking back into the last full fiscal year, the revenues that we got from fares prior to COVID was in that $23 to $24 million annually.
Correct. Okay, so that would be a pretty significant thing that we would have to find a way to make up for if we decided to go in that direction.
Well, I think if you start looking at that, that amount of funds over 20, 30-year period, I'm not the finance expert here, but if Kelly was here, I think those kind of funds that would build an entire new line, rail line.
Yeah, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And for what it's worth, my own personal preference would be to find a much more targeted way to assist people who have difficulty paying for the transit, rather than issue a carte blanche that gives a break also to people that don't have a problem paying. So anyway, thank you, John. Good report, and congratulations on your operating success.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I guess that's it from committee members. First of all, I want to also say this is great information. It's really helpful for all of us, so I appreciate the work that you all went to providing this year after year. Buses arriving on time continues to be the #1 factor that's most important to riders, which I think is really important because that's where we're going to build confidence in a system and get people to use it. But I also noticed that 2 other areas, hours of operation jumped from 10 to #3, and route coverage jumped from 8 to #5, which also really speaks to our need to invest in our bus system in a big way. I'm sure Envision My Ride had a lot to do with the change in route coverage, and now people saying, well, wait a minute, we want that, we want our route back where it doesn't exist anymore. But to Mr. Drigg's point of the cost of free transit at around 25, would you say 25 to 30?
It's $23.5 million.
Okay, so let's call it $25 million. And I think you told me that the operating cost alone of trying to hit our goal of 45-minute intervals, headways for one-way trip would cost about $35 million.
That is correct. And so our goal through Envision My Ride is to have no service greater than 15-minute intervals. And so that you're correct that would require additional investment, not only in more buses, but also additional frequency on our rides. And that would be about a $30 million cost from an operational standpoint.
Yeah. Which I think, and then that's not even mentioning the capital cost of more buses. I think you said that's about $100 million.
Yes.
When you talk about the infrastructure. So clearly, to even get to a point where we have a state-of-the-art premier bus system in our city, we need to look at some big numbers and some bold investments in our bus system to get there. And I do think that part of that is finding a way to target populations that need bus passes, that need help with being able to get around it for everybody, because there will be a lot of people that if we have a really great bus system that you can zip up Providence Road or Central Avenue while everybody else is stuck in traffic, i.e. a bus rapid transit, you're going to be willing to pay for that. So let's let the people who are willing to pay for it and use some of that revenue to help offset and provide subsidies for the people that can't afford it, that need to take the bus. So
I think you're exactly right, Madam Chair. There are several examples around the country where transit agencies have partnered with nonprofits to identify that segment of the population where fares are a challenge to mobility, and focusing efforts on that group rather than, as an example, we have very high ridership of some of our white-collar workers who get subsidies from their employers and are also willing to pay for higher levels of service. The equity issue about subsidizing people who are able to pay brings some different questions into that.
Absolutely. And you brought up the other point that I was going to make, and this is really to my colleagues, that when we look at our rezonings, and John and I, Mr. Lewis and I talked about this too late in the game, but with regards to 7th and North Tryon, if we have companies, especially uptown and in business districts, that are asking us for infrastructure that we paid for through a TIG or whatever, we should be saying, in return, we want you to provide bus passes to your employees. You know, I would love to see us get to the point where in this city, major corporations, as part of an employee benefit, give every employee a bus or an all-transit pass and encourage people to start using our bus system and our light rail. But we can't expect that unless we have a system that's efficient and predictable, and we're not there yet. We need a major investment in that. So,
Sure.
Thank you.
If I could, one last question. You brought up the issues on the last survey where our customers have mentioned hours of operation and route coverage. By asking these questions gives us the ability to dig deeper into that. What we found on this was it was focused. We've made changes to Envision My Ride, but the changes we made with Envision My Ride highlighted some of the other areas where we need to adjust, and that is very clearly nights and weekends. And so for our service industry riders, a lot of our bus routes end before they get off work, and so that has identified a very clear challenge that we need to address from a access and equity standpoint. Our routes end at 12 and you get off at 1 or 2, you're stuck in a lot of time.
yeah. Thank you. Mr. Driggs.
So, Madam Chair, further to what you were saying, Mr. Lewis, do you know if the mobility plan that we have right now incorporates provision for the type of investment we've been referring to, the 110 million of capital, et cetera, I mean, is there built into that the Envision My Ride objectives?
When you're referring to the mobility plan, are you referring to the transformational mobility network, sir?
The Mobility Task Force recommendation.
Yes, those numbers are included in that overall vision, not just from a capital standpoint, but also the Envision My Ride program and the operating and the additional frequencies that we've discussed.
So I think that's particularly important because those are nearer term deliverables compared to the long-term prospect of these rail projects. And I'm concerned that I haven't yet seen a more detailed breakdown among the different modes of transportation in the total investment that we're contemplating. So it's good to know at least that these things that we've talked about in the past are built in. And I think there are still more questions to be answered about the types of vehicles, when we acquire them, and what they cost. You know, the $900,000 for one kind of bus versus $6 for another. So I guess I would just make the general comment that it will be very useful to get more detail about how the numbers in the mobility plan break down and what they mean for buses. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
That's, a great question. Anything else, Ms. Jackson? Anybody else? Okay, we are going to move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you.
But don't go anywhere because you're up again with an update from you and Mr. Mock on the Silver Line.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you all know, as we continue to move forward with the design and implementation of the CATS 2030 system plan, the next project that you have invested in is the preliminary design and engineering of the Silver Line, which will provide rail connections between the town of Matthews, Center City, and out towards the airport, and potentially beyond into Gaston County and to the west and Union County to the southeast. We have reached our next phase in our public outreach, and I have Andy Mock here who will provide you an update of our latest round of public outreach with the community as we continue to refine the corridor. If you think of this as the early corridor that we identified as a thick line that generally outlined the path of the Silver Line, we have been spending time, the team over the last year, really going through almost over 100 different variations along the corridor as we continue to narrow, to hear from the community, to take a look at design options along the corridor. And our goal is to get down to one single alignment that meets not only the mobility needs of our community, but also the broader city policy to help support affordable housing and encourage economic development. So with that, I'll turn over to Andy Mock, who is the project manager for the Silver Line, and he'll give you a report on our latest refinement of the corridor and the results of our public outreach.
Thank you, John. And I want to thank also the TAB committee for having me out, to give me the opportunity to provide an update for the Link Silver Line and where we stand today with our preliminary recommendations. Sorry, Wendy, I'm not able to advance the slide.
Andy, if you could just tell her next slide, she can advance.
Will do. Next slide, please. Thank you. So where we are is we're at the very beginning of what we call pre-project development. That's before you enter into the formal federal pipeline, which is called project development. And really the goal of this phase, as Mr. Lewis says, is to really refine the LPA or the fat Sharpie line down to specifically what project are we going to pursue before we enter into the more detailed engineering and environmental phase. So that's kind of where we are right now. Once we kind of have that alignment and stations identified, we're going to start seeking to do some more area planning, some of those sort of the secondary benefits of light rail, housing opportunities, those sort of things. That's kind of most of that work occurs after you've adopted the alignment. But however, the teams that are advancing some of that work are also informing the design team and the engineering team so that we make sure we make the best design and engineering decisions possible. We have completed what's called early scoping. That's a federal process. It's like an early environmental screening that the agencies, the permitting agencies do. So we've completed that in the fall and with good results. And we're heading towards an MTC adoption of the refined locally preferred alternative, which I'll show you today. Next slide, please. So this just kind of in words, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's an effective slide to kind of show you. It shows that kind of that fat line that John kind of said, breaking that up into many, many different lines. Really think about it like the LPA that was adopted said, we're going to go down Wilkinson Boulevard. And so then we asked the question, the team asked the question, what does that mean? Does that mean we're on the north side, the south side, in the middle, above, under? And so we kind of go through that and do through a short listing process and come back with our recommendation, which kind of where we are. That's the process we do in this first year, coming back with our initial recommendation. Next slide, please. And so, how we kind of get to those 100 different lines, we kind of look at this from a kind of a more detailed engineering evaluation, probably more detailed than anyone's ever looked at the southeast and west corridors before, kind of getting in the weeds to really understand the impacts, good and bad, of each one of the 100 lines. Also evaluating environmental considerations, ensuring that we understand, if there's any sort of natural species or features that are, as well as built environment and human issues as well. Evaluating corridor changes. There are changes that may have happened in the corridor, especially the southeast corridor, which hasn't been really been studied since 2016 as part of that initial system planning. So there's been potentially a lot of changes. So we spent a deep dive kind of understanding the built environment. Public input has probably been one of the biggest things that we really focused on. We have had a lot of public meetings have been challenged by the COVID crisis, as everyone has, but we've really given it our best shot to try to get public engagement on these, and we continue to be focused on that throughout the process. Coordination with other projects. We have plus or minus 15 NCDOT projects out there that we touch in some way, so it's very important for us to be well coordinated with those to understand them, and also to bring all of our experience from the Links Blue Line. I've worked on the Blue Line for 20 years. Several people on our team have worked on the Blue Line for many, many years. So we wanted to take some time to really get our heads around what worked well and what didn't work so well, and what would we do better if we could do it over again, and bring those lessons to the Silver Line. So once we have those kind of 100 different lines, then you say, okay, how do you take it from 100 down to 1? And really that gets down to this benefit and risk decision-making framework. So what we're trying to do is maximize benefits and lower the risks. So we want a competitive and reliable transit travel time. So we want to make sure that the Silver Line is as competitive as possible with with an automobile. We want to promote equitable transit-oriented development. That we want to enable those secondary benefits that make great places around the stations. So we want to make sure that we configure the alignments in the station to ensure that that can occur. And we want to improve access to destinations and local connectivity. We want to make sure people can get from their house to where they need to go to work, school, or to play via light rail, and so make sure that that access is there. And some of that will be with the Silver Line, some of that may be with a separate capital project that facilitates some of those connections and access. All the while, we want to minimize the risks, so we want to make sure that we're not, the Silver Line is not tied to some or dependent on some other project happening or some other major stakeholder that could say no. So we want to be very cautious with how dependent the Silver Line is on others. We want to be capital not high. We want to highly watch capital and operating costs because this project will have to compete for state and federal funds. So capitals are important. And of course, operating is always important to make sure that we have a cost-effective operational project. And also environmental screening, because this will compete for federal funds. It will have to go through a robust environmental screening. So that's always critical. Next slide. So just to get into it, this is the high-level version of our preliminary staff recommendation. It doesn't look that different from the initial one at the macro level, zoomed out. Once you zoom in, I'll focus on some more specific things. But really, in broad terms, it goes from Belmont along Wilkinson Boulevard, past the airport, around Center City, the stations and Charlotte Gateway and the Blue Line, out Independence Boulevard to the Village Lake area, then transitions to Monroe Road corridor, out to the town of Matthews and into Union County. We'll go into some of the details next slide. So this is, when you see this focus area 2, just the scale of the Silver Line is so big, it's so massive. It's 3 times longer than any single light rail project that we've pursued. So, you know, the Silver Line is 26 miles as we currently configure it. Both the Blue Line extension were 9. So, you know, to break it up, to really get people to understand it, we need to break it up into what we call focus areas. What I'm going to be going over today is focus areas 2, 3, 4, and 5, and those are the ones within Charlotte city limits. Focus area 1 and 6 are mostly outside city limits. So focus area 2 is the airport area in Wilkinson Boulevard. And so the first decision really is how we're interfacing with the airport. And how we're addressing the airport's desire to have a kind of a land use vision for the area between Wilkinson Boulevard and I-85, Billy Grant Parkway, and I-485. The airport has kind of a plan to redevelop that area into more like a hotel conference center, and so they envision light rail being in the middle of that, which we also see a major benefit. However, the airport's communicated to us that that timeline of that development plan may be pushed off because of some impacts related to COVID and their budget. So at this point, we are recommending to continue following the locally preferred alternative, which is in purple, but keep the door open to continue coordinating with the airport if their plans change or their time frame moves up faster. Then we can continue to work with them and potentially make that adjustment in the future if it continues to make sense. Just as a note on these maps I'm going to be showing, the purple line shows the initial or the preliminary staff recommendation we're taking to the public. The gray lines show alignments that we have evaluated but are not recommending at this time. So that's what we're receiving public feedback on. The next area after, say, Morrisfield, sorry, can you go back? Thank you. The next area as we're going forward is the inner part of Wilkinson Boulevard, and that's everything from Morrisfield into Center City. So in that case, the LPA did recommend, the initial LPA back from 2019 recommended following Wilkinson Boulevard, kind of like Tryon Street. However, based on our evaluation of the lane configuration, the street configuration of Wilkinson Boulevard, incorporating light rail into Wilkinson Boulevard would create a very, very wide cross-section. It would almost double the width of Wilkinson Boulevard in our initial reviews. We thought that's too impactful, not only from a real estate perspective, but also from a business and a community perspective. It really just creates a really big footprint, hard to cross, and has major impacts on the businesses along there and the ability for people to cross it. That's kind of caused us to look at an opportunity to kind of follow what we call Norfolk Southern adjacent, and that's an alignment that parallels the railroad, not within the railroad right-of-way per se, but just outside of it, directly adjacent. That provides some opportunities. A, it mitigates the cost and impact of rebuilding Wilkinson Boulevard and all the widening and real estate impact. So that's a net good, but it also provides a really unique opportunity to kind of reimagine that area, that largely industrial area along the railroad between Norfolk Southern and Wilkinson Boulevard. Next slide. The next area is focus area 3, and this is Center City. The real two big things that we've recommending at this time is really how we get around I-277, I-77 interchange. As you can see, the preliminary staff recommendation is on the southern side of that interchange with stations at Subtle and Moorhead. The LPA that was initially adopted goes along the northern side. But really, when we started to get into the weeds, we had access. Well, if you could imagine, there's two different levels below that high level benefit and risk analysis, which get into the weeds of each one of those evaluations, and there's metrics associated with it. So when we come up with our recommendation, it includes a very detailed evaluation. You know, there's metrics and tables that kind of build up to those recommendations. So we do try to have a very detailed way. Now, for presentation purposes, we don't get into that sort of detail, but we do have a lot of information about that. When it gets into that sort of land acquisition, I think that's something where we continue to identify opportunities. And I think when we have conversations with folks in the community, they see those opportunities, and some of those are some of those are metrics within our scorecard. Those, you know, identifying those opportunities for affordable housing or land acquisition or those sort of things. But I think there's also some strategies that the TOD team will come back with this year to kind of guide us on what those recommendations ought to be, and kind of guide, you know, how we ought to be acquiring for the project to meet those other goals. And so I don't think we have our heads completely around that yet, and the TOD team, through their recommendations, will help inform some of that.
Thank you. And I think in particular, I look at the LPA process and again, these other goals. And the point is that your outcome on the LPA side doesn't necessarily line up with our overall conclusion about what represents the best return on our investment. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Maybe I don't understand the question, sir.
Well, my understanding is that you've got a locally preferred alternative concept, and that you're working a lot with kind of residents along the line to solicit their input about what they see as the kind of best solution, maybe for the purposes of their own needs. And I'm saying there are considerations other than the needs of that particular population that mean that we won't necessarily end up with the absolutely most favorite outcome from the outreach process.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think there is a perfect alignment here. It's a very challenging corridor. You know, if you think about the Blue Line, and I won't talk about it too long, but I worked on the Blue Line for 20 years. But the Blue Line was a relatively straightforward corridor that was following a railroad and then following a highway, and there was only one transition point. So the decisions were simple and straightforward. The Silver Line is not that. It is much, much more complicated and complex. So there are trade-offs, and we try to encapsulate those trade-offs in our benefits and risks evaluation, because I take your point. There is no perfect solution that meets all goals. It's a series of trade-offs and values.
Okay, appreciate that. My next question, I don't know, maybe for Mr. Lewis, but there was reference to the 5% and 15% stages and our overall kind of progress along the federal line. In the past, we've seen a breakdown of the timeline for those, and we've already authorized a certain amount of investment to reach different stages at different points in time. So has that analysis changed much? Are we kind of in line with what we initially approved. I think we allowed $50 million or something through a council action to get us to a certain point in design, I think 5%. But are we still kind of in the same kind of, do we still have the same expectation about how much it's going to take to reach the respective stages?
Andy, I'll take this one. Thank you, Councilman Driggs. We are following the same timeline. Part of it, the outreach has taken a little longer than we had originally imagined due to the impact of the pandemic and making it a little more difficult to have public outreach in a completely virtual environment. But as Andy mentioned earlier, once we finish this outreach process and the MTC and along with the elected bodies along the corridor agree on the final alignment, we will then begin the design. And Andy, I believe you had a graphic that said when we would begin the 15% design phase. I don't remember that date, but Andy, if you have that, please jump in.
Yeah, so we have, so just one thing to say about those dates. I mean, those numbers are, general configurations, so don't get too caught up in 5 versus 15%. But in general, 15%, it begins in earnest upon completion of the adoption of the locally preferred alternative. We are advancing certain elements of 15%, some survey and some in engineering evaluation. It really depends on how comfortable we are with moving forward with aspects of the 15% in advance of the MTC adoption. So really, it begins more at 15% more in earnest when the alignment is adopted. However, in certain areas, some detailed evaluation is kind of beginning now, so that we're prepared for that.
Okay, the concern I have here is that we are incurring these costs without necessarily having established the willingness of stakeholders, whether it's the state, the towns, counties, the referendum, public referendum. So is it completely wrong to be a little concerned about the possibility that we discover later that the 1 cent sales tax and all the other things that are incorporated into our assumptions about funding may not be attainable? And is there a possibility we end up having spent a lot of money that we, on a plan that we're unable to see through as it's currently conceived?
Councilman Driggs, I think that is the major question that has always surrounded this project, and we had that discussion as we, with you all, as we wanted to begin this project, and council authorized the $50 million expenditure for preliminary design and engineering. Really, this gets into a chicken or an egg kind of discussion. Do we seek the funding before we start the design work? And I think there are valid arguments on either side. What really was the driving factor for us in beginning this project now was the amount of projects that are going on with NCDOT as an example, that if we didn't begin would have precluded us, no matter what the outcome from a public policy standpoint, we had to get a certain level of coordination and design done, or else a lot of these factors that we're dealing with now would have been off the table, because NCDOT, as an example, could have designed a bridge over into Gaston County that didn't align with our ability to add rail to it, as an example. As they continue with their design work for I-277, we had to be sure that we were in alignment, or else they could have built options that would have precluded the Silver Line in the future. So I think we can have a healthy debate on the whole which should have come first, but I think the coordination of those other infrastructure projects really necessitated us to move forward with this. Now, these level plan work that we're doing now will always be relevant as we move into the future. And so I think this is the point after we finish this initial design work where we would stop until the broader policy goals are established. But we would not have wasted that time because of those factors I just outlaid. I hope that gets a little closer to answering your question, sir.
Yes, I understand that, and I realize there are some tough choices that you do have to make about chicken and egg. The only thing I would say is you can pursue a number of processes like the Citizens Advisory Group we had and get all kinds of kind of apparently positive signals or encouragement, but you need to identify the people whose support is critical, and you need to engage with them pretty actively. So in my conversations with members of the General Assembly, for example, I don't feel that they are kind of informed enough or expressing the kind of willingness that we would hope for at this stage. And even when you get to the towns and things, I've heard things like people in Matthews and leadership positions say, yeah, we love it, you know, and but leave us alone with your sales tax. So we really need to establish that we have a willing coalition of stakeholders that understand the costs as well as the benefits and accept the fact that a plan that was created by Charlotte is in their best interest. And I think there are things we could be doing to try to clarify that quickly so we don't get in too deep unnecessarily. I'll just put it that way. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Oh, Mr. Winston? Are you still there, Mr. Winston?
No, sorry, my hand was just never put down.
Oh, okay, thanks. I do have a question along the theme of funding. What happens if we only get, I mean, best case that we even get anything, but we only get half of what we need? Have you looked at which phases of the Silver Line you would start? You know, how would that work if we only got partial funding?
So I think, you know, whatever partial funding means, we would be able to come back to council with a list of options for that would prioritize a segment, or, you know, a staging segment. We could begin with Uptown to the airport first, or Matthews to Uptown first, or perhaps even a middle alignment somewhere. But those, we can certainly work to create a project that can be delivered based on the amount of funding available. But that would be a broader I think, public policy discussion over how we allocate and design the project based on available funding.
So from a design standpoint, there's not one section that is more critical to start, you know, than another, even politically speaking?
Yeah, I think we would design the entire project, getting to that point, and we would make a decision based on available funding, what could be constructed.
Okay.
And so design work would continue because we would have to design the entire project in order to get the federal funding, no matter what that number is. And then what we construct would be based on what is the overall funding availability.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If we don't have any other questions, then I will move ahead and on to the next item, which is an update on the Charlotte 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And we're going to have Mr. Jaiwoba and Ms. Osborne to present that to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good morning again, council members. Alicia will do the bulk of the presentation, but just before she does, I just wanted to make a few remarks. One is that what she's going to present to you today is really more of process for how we've been receiving community input into the process, and you know what's next in terms of what we do with those comments. I would say that in the last several months, Actually, in the last several weeks, I should say we've had some really, really robust engagement with the community. We started these community conversations, and she's going to talk to you briefly about that. And we had almost 200 participants. That was at the beginning of January. And then we had a meeting with the Canopy Realtors Association last Friday. I think almost 300 people were online. And this week we're going to be meeting with RABIC as well as the Association of Black Realtors in Charlotte. So while on one hand we've been having community conversations with members of the community, we've also been having targeted conversations with industry experts. And in that case, we're not just sharing with them the comprehensive plan, but also the associated Unified Development Ordinance, as well as the Tree Canopy Action Plan. Some really good comments have been coming from the community. And so this is really just sharing with you again the process for doing this until we come to council in March for a public hearing. I believe that's March 22nd or so for public hearing. And then in April, end of April, for council adoption. But she's going to walk us through that, and I'll be happy to take questions when we are done. Thank you. Alicia?
Thank you, Tyrell. Thank you, too, to the committee for allowing an opportunity for us to share where we are today. I apologize in advance if my voice goes out. I've been having a bit of a coughing issue this morning, but I'll push through to make sure you guys get an update on where we are. As Tyrell mentioned, today we'll just focus on kind of process for how we're hearing the community, make sure that they feel heard, and also that you all feel like you have accurate information or a clear picture of what we are hearing from the community. So from now until April, we're laser focused in two main areas. That's continuing our engagement, not just to our neighborhoods, but to our business owners. As Tyrell mentioned, we have really been talking to our development community in small groups and in some large venues as well, but definitely having that really intense dialogue about, one, what will the plan do and how will it connect to their everyday work in terms of growth and development. We're also, I'll share a little bit later, talking about how we will receive those comments, the different ways people can participate in the engagement and share their comments, and how we plan to organize it. Next slide. You all may remember in October, we had a drive-in event and released the plan document. We were able to, in that event alone, share 500 copies of the plan. And then following that Tuesday, we stationed ourselves at election polls throughout the community to share hard copies of the document. So we're not only just online to review the document and receive comments that way, but we also have a really robust strategy to make sure that folks who aren't digitally connected can also get a hard copy. So throughout the city, we are partnering with small businesses and some businesses to put flyers in their businesses to let the community know that there are hard copies of the document at 19 libraries throughout the community. So over the holidays, we were working with our partners at the library, as we always do with our policy documents, to make sure that folks who are not connected digitally can make sure that they have a hard copy. Even if you want to just sit and review the copy and fill the pages, you have that option. Next slide, please. There are a number of ways for the community to provide comments, and we have definitely received a lot of comments so far. Just between over the holidays and to date, we've gotten over 200 individual comments, but some comments are from folks, and they have shared pages and pages of very, very, very detailed comments. And that's the kind of feedback we want. What we're learning is that it's easier for people to review the document and have something tangible to respond to. So release of the document has definitely helped us to receive some really good feedback on the plan document. They can comment on the plan directly. Each page has a comment feature. They can also email us their comments, request a form if they want to write it out and mail it to us. And they can also call 311 and leave a message, and we'll get the comments that way. That was really important for those residents who are visually impaired that they feel like they can have a comment, a way to provide their feedback on the plan as well. Next slide, please. So here's how we're planning to organize the comments. We'll make sure that we know exactly what the resident is saying, document that, and how do we receive that comment? Is it from the E-plan, from a community meeting, through a council meeting or a planning commission meeting? That's really important to show how people are participating in the process. So we'll know who we need to reach out to as well. And also, what is the plan topic? What part of the plan document are they commenting on? And then how will we respond to that? A lot of the feedback we're getting thus far are on elements that are already in the plan. So it's just making sure that we communicate what's in the plan, what needs to be addressed via a revision or a topic that is not related to the plan at all or needs additional action outside of the plan. So it's important to make sure that we're being very transparent about what we're receiving and how we will handle those comments. What we're working on now, and it'll be available next week, the 1st of February, is a online kind of dashboard with all the comments. So anyone can view what is being said about the plan and how we plan to resolve that moving forward. So if there is a conversation that needs to be had with a staff member or with an elected official about something they said, everyone in our community that's affected or even interested in the plan will see what the dialogue is around the plan comments. Next slide. Ty shared a little bit of our adoption process and kind of the steps moving forward. Since the plan document released in October, we've continued to definitely engage our community and have those conversations about the plan content, what the plan will and won't do, those types of conversations, and then how the plan will connect to their interests and our growth and development regulations. That's been a lot of what the plan has been about. And then, so this month and next month, we're just updating elected appointed officials. In March, we will request a recommendation for approval based on, that will also include recommended changes to the document. And then in April, ultimately request for action for approval on the document. I do want to note that there will only be, and we talked about it before, there will only be one draft document. And that's to control the various versions that could possibly be out there in the community. So that's to help with transparency, and that if someone has reviewed the document back in October, if they pick it up today, it's the exact same document. So that's the purpose of keeping and only having one draft. What will happen at adoption? There will be a list of recommended revisions. And once the plan is adopted with the recommended revisions, staff will then produce, after adoption, a final document. So there's only one draft and only one final. So that helps with transparency in the community. No matter where you are in the process, we're all on the same page about which version of the document we're discussing. Next slide, please. So Ty mentioned our community conversations, which is our speaker series, where we are inviting experts from around the country to share their learnings and what we can implement in Charlotte around a comprehensive plan. So we kicked it off January 12th. We had about 182 participants that folks listened in and shared and asked questions of Kimberly, who is the executive director for Washington Housing Conservancy. She also was the project manager and assistant director for DC planning. She led the comp plan in DC, but she also worked in Detroit as the assistant director, where she implemented a lot of their placemaking, their housing initiatives there, and also the community benefits agreement. She had some work around that. So she shared her learnings and what she learned from that. Next up, we have in February on the 9th is Paul Magouche. He's no stranger to Charlotte. He helped us before when we first kicked off our process. So he's coming back again to share how equity and housing can help us to achieve some of our goals. in the comp plan. And then we'll wrap up the conversation series, the speaker series with Mayor Charles Hales from Portland. So we'll get that elected official perspective on community building and how comprehensive plans can help us achieve our overall vision for the community. Next slide. We will also be hosting on February 9th our virtual open house. I think Mayor Pro Tem mentioned this idea, and we're definitely doing it. It's allowing our residents and the community to view the planned contents via a virtual meeting room setting. So it'll be something that's available 24/7. Folks can walk through different stations, and within every station has content from the plan. There's interactive videos and exercises and surveys to collect data and comments, and it'll be available in also over 100 languages. So this is a really neat way of making sure that people can learn what's in the plan and do it on their own time. And there's a feature where you can have a direct chat with staff or our consultant and have a dialogue about specific questions. So we're really excited about this interactive virtual exercise to introduce content from the plan. Next slide. We will continue our community building game. And I know you guys have heard about this over and over again, but it has really been successful in terms of providing people a way to learn about the game, learn about the plan in a fun way and during their own time. And we've actually had international participants in the game, folks that just like gaming and planning. Who would have thought the two connect, and then we have something like this, but people are really excited about it. Our focus from now to plan adoption is really getting into the neighborhoods. Our first neighborhood focused online event will be on the 27th with our West End neighbors, and that's to really give them an opportunity to have dialogue with staff as we play the game. So we're really excited about that. We also have a virtual play with the Knight Foundation and Smart Growth America tomorrow. And that's to also get just to demonstrate how we're engaging people during COVID-19 around this really important initiative. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. Want to encourage you all to make sure that your constituents, your residents, your neighbors, your family and friends stay connected to the process. We are still receiving comments and still having dialogue about the plan. So that hasn't stopped, and we will continue until April. We want to make sure we share information right here so you can make sure you connect your constituents to the plan and process. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alicia. We have a question from Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you go back to the virtual open house slide, please? The interactive, it's a couple slides before, I believe.
It's after, two slides after.
Keep advancing. Yeah.
Keep going. One more, two more. After that, yes.
Perfect, thank you. This will be up for an extended period of time, correct?
Yes, 24/7 until plan adoption. And it might be something that we just keep in our toolbox as we move forward.
And I assume that it was built to be incredibly low barrier in terms of someone's ability to log in and figure it out very quickly. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
So yes, you can, we're testing it on various platforms. It's definitely mobile friendly. So when you tap on the link, it goes right into the meeting. There's no login, there's no whole bunch of questions or anything like that. So it's really easy for people to access.
And there's no app for anybody to download or anything like that. It's just, it's done through the browser. It might be a good opportunity to have Ty Woe or others from the planning department on the government channel, or, you know, if they film something that a half an hour program, if we use on the government channel or use on our social media channels, just showing them navigating the platform and talking about what some of the different things mean as far as it'll give people the opportunity to see how they can get in and engage with this program, which looks very cool. I'm eager to test it out myself, but also to understand some of what it's telling them about how this plan will shape the built environment in our city and how that will impact residents of our city. So I think it could serve dual purpose of encouraging people to go try the tool themselves, but also having a broader understanding through that explanation that Ty or whoever would give while hosting it, what this plan means for those who've not yet engaged with it. But it looks very cool, so I'm eager to see it.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Mr. Eggleston. And Alicia, thank you. That's great information. And I'm excited to try this virtual open house and figure out how to use it and then share it with others. Do we have anyone else? Okay. Mr. Jaiwoba has a comment to make.
Yeah, thank you. So we continue to go out on the street virtually every week. Over the weekend, we actually played the game with a group of middle schoolers in the city, and then shared this with Jack and Jill. And this week, I'm going to be presenting to the women's executive in the city, and I think right now it's going to be about 100 people registered for that event. And Alicia and I presented to Director Kisler of the library and his staff last week as well. So as many people as you know are interested in knowing more about the comprehensive plans, so that way they can get their comments out to us, please do not hesitate to either send me a message or send Alicia a message, or any of our planning staff will be there, because that's what we're doing every single day. Some comments are just amazing from our residents, things that are just, whether it's from the architect, the AIA group, or the Urban Land Institute, or even NAOP. Some really, really good comments have been coming in. I would like to keep it flowing, so that way when we go to Planning Commission in March, we're able to review this with them and then eventually come to you in March. You're able to hear some of those comments as well. But I'm really proud of our community. I think that they are paying attention to this, and that's something very important. That despite the COVID and the impact on people's individual lives, they still understand the importance of looking ahead into the future, and they've been really, really good in showing up and participating in every event that we've sent out. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, when we give ourselves extra time on these meetings is when we're most efficient, so that seems to be working pretty well. I think that's all we have, unless any committee members have any other comments or questions they wanted to make. I think we're good. Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your week. We'll see you all later tonight. Bye.
Bye.